Imagine marching through an impenetrable jungle, the air thick with humidity and the constant drone of insects. Your boots sink into mud with every step, leeches cling to your skin, and the weight of your Arisaka rifle feels heavier by the hour. Malaria ravages your unit, supplies dwindle to nothing, and the enemy is closing in from all sides. But something else is watching you, something that doesn't belong to this war or this world. In the spring of 1944, during the brutal Burma Campaign, the Imperial Japanese Army launched Operation Yugo, a desperate offensive aimed at invading India through the rugged hills of Manipur and the dense jungles of northern Burma. The Japanese 15th Army, under Lieutenant General Renya Mutaguchi, committed 3 divisions, the 15th, 31st, and 33rd, totaling over 100,000 men. It was meant to be a decisive blow to cut Allied supply lines and turn the tide in Southeast Asia, but the campaign became a catastrophe. Starvation, disease, and relentless Allied counterattacks decimated the Japanese forces. By July 1944, after the disastrous defeats at Imphal and Kohima, the 15th Army had suffered over 55,000 casualties, with thousands more dying during the retreat. Entire battalions vanished in the jungle, cut off, surrounded, or simply overwhelmed by the unforgiving terrain. One such unit was a reinforced regiment from the 3rd Division, approximately 3,000 men tasked with a flanking maneuver through the remote Kabul Valley. Historical records show they advanced deep into enemy territory, but were never heard from again after late May 1944. No survivors returned. No bodies were recovered in significant numbers. British and Indian patrols later found abandoned equipment and scattered remains, but the regiment had effectively ceased to exist. Official Japanese accounts list them as missing in action, lost to the chaos of retreat. Fast forward to the modern era. That same jungle region now borders a remote training area used by the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force, JGSDF, established on the site of a former Imperial Japanese Army barracks in a mountainous prefecture. The old concrete structures, built in the 1930s, were repurposed after the war. Today, young JGSDF recruits train there. Firing ranges, obstacle courses, barracks blocks echoing with the sounds of modern drills. But for decades, personnel stationed at this base have reported something unnatural. Footsteps marching in perfect formation at night when no one is on parade. Whispers in archaic Japanese, commands barked from empty rooms. Apparitions of emaciated soldiers in tattered Type 98 uniforms, staring silently from the tree line. These aren't just campfire tales. Multiple testimonies from serving members, collected anonymously to protect careers, describe encounters that defy explanation. Tonight, we'll share 5 of those accounts. First-person stories from JGSDF soldiers who experienced the impossible. What happened to that lost regiment in 1944? Did they all perish in the jungle? Or did something follow them home? Chapter 1. The Midnight Parade. I joined the JGSDF in 2012. Fresh out of high school and full of that naive determination you have at 18. Basic training broke me down and built me back up. But nothing in those months of drills, mud, and endless push-ups prepared me for my first permanent posting. A remote mountain training base in a prefecture the higher-ups always insist on keeping off public maps. The place is cut off from everything. Hours from the nearest town, surrounded by thick forest that seems to swallow sound. The base itself is a mix of modern facilities and old Imperial-era structures that somehow survived the post-war purges. The concrete barracks blocks built in the late 1930s still stand like silent sentinels, their thick walls painted regulation gray, but scarred by decades of weather and use. My platoon drew Barracks Block C, one of the oldest on the installation. On the surface, it looked ordinary enough after post-war renovations. Rows of metal bunks, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, wall-mounted air conditioners fighting the perpetual damp. But the bones of the building were unmistakable. Narrow corridors, high ceilings, polished concrete floors that echoed every footstep. The ground floor even had an interior courtyard, originally designed for close order drill during inclement weather. No one used it for that anymore. It was just an empty square of concrete ringed by shadowed archways. Fire watch was a standard duty, rotated nightly. You walked the corridors hourly, checked doors, made sure nothing was burning, and no one was wandering where they shouldn't. I drew the midnight to dawn shift one autumn night after a particularly brutal day of physical training and live fire exercises. The rest of the platoon was dead to the world, snoring in their racks after lights out. The building was quiet except for the low hum of the AC units and the occasional creak of old concrete settling. I was on my third or fourth circuit of the upper floors when I first heard it. A rhythmic thudding, muffled at first, rising steadily from below. Boots on concrete, hundreds of them, striking the ground in perfect unison. Left, right, left, right. The cadence was unmistakable, drilled into every recruit since the Imperial days. The old marching rhythm, slower and heavier than our modern quick time. I stopped dead in the corridor, straining to listen. No drill was scheduled. No company was up for night training. The entire base was asleep except for the sentries on the outer perimeter. I keyed my radio quietly. Duty NCO. This is Private Nakamura on Firewatch, Block C. Hearing what sounds like formation marching in the interior courtyard. The reply came back sleepy but professional. Negative, Nakamura. No movement authorized. Probably whined through the vents or a stray animal. Continue your rounds. Wind doesn't march in cadence. Animals don't keep perfect time. I crept to the stairwell and peered down through the dim red emergency lighting. The sound grew louder, closer, as if the formation was completing a column right directly below me. Then I saw them. Shadows first. Long, stretched ranks moving across the courtyard in textbook columns of fours. Dozens at first, then more, filling the space until it seemed the entire square was occupied. They wore the old uniforms, knee-length greatcoats in some cases, puttees wrapped around calves, peaked caps pulled low, rifles slung muzzle down over right shoulders, the distinctive shape of Arisaka bayonets catching what little light there was. No faces, just darkness where features should be, as if the light refused to touch them. My pulse hammered in my ears. I flicked on my flashlight and aimed the beam downward. The white light cut straight through empty air. Concrete courtyard, bare walls, a few dead leaves skittering in the draft. Nothing else. But the marching continued undeterred, boots striking ground that showed no footprints, the rhythm echoing off the surrounding arches like a drumbeat from another era. I don't remember deciding to move. My feet just carried me down the stairs two at a time, radio forgotten. The moment my boot hit the ground floor landing, the sound stopped. Abruptly. Completely. The silence that followed felt heavier than the marching had. I swept the courtyard with my light. Empty. Not even the leaves moved now. The air was colder than it should have been, breath visible, skin prickling under my fatigues. I walked the entire square, checking every corner, every shadowed archway. Nothing. No heat signatures, no footprints in the thin layer of dust, no explanation. When I finally reported for shift change at dawn, the duty NCO gave me the standard knowing smile. First week here, and you already heard the parade. Happens to most new arrivals. Get used to it. I tried to laugh it off in the mess hall later, but an older corporal from another platoon overheard and pulled me aside during chow. He spoke low, eyes scanning to make sure no officers were nearby. You heard them march, didn't you? The old ones. They do that every few months. Always the same route, always the same cadence. Some say it's the regiment that never came back from Burma. They drilled here before shipping out in '44. Now they keep drilling, like they're waiting for orders that will never come. That night, lying in my bunk, I couldn't shake the image of those silent ranks. Sleep came in fits, and sometime in the early hours I heard it again. Not marching this time, but faint voices carried through the ventilation shafts. Old Japanese, formal and clipped, commands I half recognized from historical documentaries. Zenshin. Advance. Kamai. Ready. And beneath it all, a quieter murmur, almost lost in the hum of the AC. Names being called, responses given in voices that sounded exhausted beyond endurance. Hi. 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 As if someone somewhere was still taking. Roll call for men who would never answer in this world again. Chapter 2. The Emaciated Sentry. My name is Tanaka. I enlisted in 2008 and served 7 years before rotating out. By 2011, I had made private first class and was sent with my platoon to the same remote mountain base for our annual live fire qualification cycle. The place has a reputation that travels ahead of it like bad weather. Everyone knows the stories before they ever set foot through the gate, but you dismiss them as hazing fodder until you experience something yourself. We were assigned to Block A, the oldest habitable structure on the installation. The building sits closest to the tree line, with only a narrow service road and a chain-link perimeter fence separating its rear wall from the forest. The renovations had added modern plumbing and wiring, but the original 1930s concrete still dominated. Thick exterior walls, small windows set high, corridors that seem to absorb light no matter how many fluorescent tubes you install. The air always carried a faint, damp smell, like earth that never quite dries. Perimeter sentry duty was mandatory during field exercises, two-man teams walking the fence line in staggered shifts, armed with Type 89 rifles and standard load-bearing kit. I volunteered for the late watch because I preferred the quiet. Most of the platoon was already rack-out exhausted after a full day on the ranges. The night I remember best was in early winter. A heavy fog had rolled down from the peaks after dark, thick enough to cut visibility to a few meters, even with a white light torch. Sound carried strangely in it, muffled one moment, unnaturally sharp the next. I was alone on the back stretch near the disused rear gate, an old iron-barred relic from the Imperial era that hasn't been opened in decades. Rust has fused the hinges, vines and moss have claimed the posts. I was moving slowly, sweeping my light along the fence for any signs of breach or wildlife, when I caught movement ahead. An upright figure, motionless, positioned exactly where a sentry would stand if that gate were still active. I halted and challenged in a low voice. "Identify yourself, friend or foe." No answer. The figure remained at perfect attention, rifle held at port arms. I advanced cautiously, boots crunching on gravel. As the fog parted just enough for my light to reach him, details emerged. He wore the old khaki service uniform, Type 98 tunic, breeches, puttees wound tight around the calves. The cloth was faded to a sickly gray-green, frayed at cuffs and hem. A steel helmet with the Imperial star sat low over his brow. The rifle was an Arisaka, bayonet fixed, the metal dulled with age. But it was his build that stopped me cold. Tall for a soldier of that era, yet skeletal. Shoulders sharp under the tunic, arms like sticks, wrists protruding far beyond the sleeves. His neck was corded tendon over bone. I raised my own rifle and repeated the challenge, louder this time. "Halt! Show your hands!" He turned his head, slowly, deliberately, until he faced me directly. The face beneath the helmet brim was a nightmare of starvation, cheekbones jutting, eyes sunken so deep they seemed to recede into the skull, skin stretched parchment thin, yellowish, almost translucent in the torch beam, lips drawn back in a rictus that exposed teeth too large for the wasted gums. He raised his right hand in salute, palm outward, fingers extended and joined, the old Imperial style none of us use anymore. The movement was precise, mechanical. My radio crackled as I keyed it. "Control, this is Tanaka on rear perimeter. Unknown personnel at disused gate. Request immediate backup." The reply was calm but urgent. "Copy, hold position. Team en route." While I waited, the figure remained frozen in that salute. Then his mouth opened. No sound emerged, yet the words formed clearly inside my head, formal and clipped. "Keibi o tsutomete orimasu." Continuing guard duty. I felt the hair rise on my neck. The fog seemed to thicken around us, isolating the gate in a pocket of cold that bit through my fatigues. Breath plumed white in front of my face. Backup arrived minutes later, 2 NCOs with lights and weapons at the ready. As their beams swept the area, the figure dissolved like mist struck by wind. One moment he stood there, the next only empty space and swirling fog. We searched the entire section of fence. No footprints in the soft earth, no heat on thermal, no sign anyone had been there at all. The duty officer logged it as possible hallucination due to fatigue and fog optics. Unofficially, the platoon sergeant told me later that the old gate had been a primary exit point for units deploying to Burma in 1944. Sentries were posted there day and night until the last transport rolled out. After that night, no one wanted the rear perimeter slot alone. We rotated in pairs, and even then we'd hear it sometimes on quiet shifts. A faint voice carried on the wind, challenging unseen intruders in archaic Japanese. "Tamare, dare da! Halt! Who goes there?" As if he were still waiting for relief that would never arrive. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Armory. I was a sergeant by 2018, posted to the base armorers section after completing the Advanced Weapons Maintenance course. The armory sits underground beneath the headquarters building, a vaulted concrete bunker built in the late 1930s, originally designed to store munitions for an entire division before overseas deployment. Thick walls, steel doors, constant temperature, and humidity control. The air down there always feels heavy, stale, like it's been recycled too many times. Fluorescent tubes run the length of the ceiling, but the light never quite reaches the corners. Shadows pool around the racks and shelves, no matter how many fixtures are on. My team and I were conducting a full annual inventory, every rifle, pistol, machine gun, and round of ammunition accounted for by serial number and lot. It was tedious, mandatory work that usually ran late into the night. On this particular shift, there were only 3 of us. Myself, Corporal Sato, a solid technician with 5 years under his belt, and Private Yamamoto, still fresh, eager to prove himself. We started at 1900 hours and planned to finish by 200 if everything went smoothly. By midnight, we were deep in the small arms section, counting Type 89 assault rifles stacked in their racks. The only sounds were the click of counters, the occasional metallic clack of a bolt being checked, and our own breathing. Then the lights flickered, just once like a brief power dip. We paused, looked up, waited. Nothing else happened, so we went back to work. Minutes later, Sato stopped counting. "Sergeant, you hear that?" I did. Low voices, overlapping, coming from deeper in the vault, past the rifle racks, where the ammunition crates are stored, muffled, as if spoken through cloth, but unmistakably human. At first I thought it might be maintenance personnel in the adjacent boiler room, voices carrying through the vents. I keyed the intercom to the duty office upstairs, armory to control. Any personnel in the sub-level corridors? Negative. The entire headquarters building was locked down for the night, except for our team. We moved forward cautiously, lights sweeping the aisles. The voices grew clearer, dozens of them, all male, speaking in clipped, formal Japanese. Not modern JSDF slang, but the old military dialect you only hear in war films or museum recordings. Sato whispered, "They're talking about ammunition." He was right. Fragments drifted toward us. Danyaku, Mijikai, ammunition, short. Juhachi Hako, Nakori, 18 boxes. Remaining. Hozon Seo, Teki ni Watasuna. Conserve. Do not let the enemy take them. Yamamoto's face had gone pale under the harsh lights. "Sergeant, they're counting down." We stood frozen between the racks and listened, a single voice, calm and authoritative, calling numbers in steady cadence. Jukyu, Juhachi, Junana, 19, 18, 17. Each number echoed by faint acknowledgments from many throats. "Hi." The temperature plummeted. I saw my own breath cloud in front of me, felt the cold bite through my coveralls. Frost began to form on the metal rifle barrels nearest us. I ordered a withdrawal. "Pack it in. We're sealing the vault and finishing inventory tomorrow." As we backed toward the main door, the voices rose in urgency. "Hugo, Juyon, Wusan." 15, 14, 13. Then a final command, sharp and desperate. "Tetai no junbi, tetai." Prepare to retreat. Retreat. We cleared the threshold and pulled the heavy steel door shut behind us. The moment it latched, silence. No more voices, no more cold. Just the normal hum of the ventilation fans in the corridor. We reported the incident as an environmental anomaly, possible ventilation malfunction, causing audio distortion. The duty officer logged it without comment. These things happen at that base more often than the official records admit. Later, off the record, an old master sergeant from logistics told me the armory had been packed to capacity in spring 1944. The regiment drawn from this very facility had shipped out to Burma with full loadouts, thousands of crates of 7.7mm ammunition, grenades, mortar rounds. By the time they reached the front, supply lines collapsed. Historical accounts confirmed they fought their last actions with whatever they could carry, running dry long before relief arrived. Ever since that night, armory details rotate faster than regulations require. No one volunteers for overtime inventory, and when the lights flicker down there, even the most skeptical among us find reasons to work faster. I still hear it sometimes, in quiet moments. That calm voice counting down rounds that ran out 80 years ago, always stopping at the same number, 0. Chapter 4. The Jungle Patrol. I was a squad leader in 2022, a corporal with enough time and grade to rate my own fire team during company-level exercises. That year, our battalion rotated through the mountain base for a full week of night operations, navigation, patrolling, and live fire under nods. The training area extends deep into the forested hills behind the installation, following old logging roads and footpaths that date back decades. Some of those trails were cut during the war for supply movement. You still find rusted ration tins and broken ceramic insulators if you know where to look. We drew a nightland navigation lane that pushed us farther out than most units go. The objective was simple: move 5 kilometers cross-country from insertion point to rally point, avoiding detection by roving evaluator teams. My squad, 5 of us total, inserted just after dusk. Full kit, rifles, radios, NVGs flipped down, faces blackened. The air was crisp, moon low, and filtered through heavy canopy. Sound carried far. Every snapped twig felt like a betrayal. We moved in standard wedge, bounding overwatch, keeping noise discipline tight. By the 3rd kilometer, we were deep in old-growth timber, well off any marked trail. The forest floor was thick with decades of leaf fall, soft underfoot, but treacherous with hidden roots and sudden drop-offs. Around the halfway mark, I started hearing it. Movement parallel to our line of march, branches cracking, foliage rustling, but spaced in a deliberate rhythm. Not wildlife, too consistent, too heavy. I signaled a halt, and we went to ground, listening. The sounds continued on our left flank, maybe 30 meters out. Steady pace, no attempt at stealth. I swept thermal, but picked up nothing. No heat blooms, no signatures, just cold green forest on the display. Then the marching started. Boots on damp earth, muffled but unmistakable. A column, not single file, but in loose formation, keeping perfect interval. I whispered into the squad net. Contact left. Multiple personnel. No thermal. Hold fire. Observe. We stayed low and watched. Shapes materialized in the green glow of our NVGs. First a few, then dozens. Soldiers moving on a parallel course, heading the same direction we were. They wore old-style field gear, Type 98 uniforms with rolled sleeves, canvas packs high on their backs, helmets covered in scrim netting. Some carried Arisaka rifles, others the distinctive long shape of Nambu light machine guns slung across chests. Ammunition bandoliers crossed their torsos. A few had officer swords bumping at their hips. Their movement was exhausted but disciplined, heads down, shoulders slumped under weight, yet maintaining formation as if drilled that morning. No one spoke. The only sounds were boots and the occasional clink of metal. One near the rear of the column turned his head, looked straight toward our position. The face under the helmet was gaunt beyond recognition, cheekbones sharp, eyes dark pits that seemed to drink the available light. For a moment, the NVG image flared faintly around those eyes, as if they generated their own dim glow. My point man, Private First Class Akita, breathed over the net. "Corporal, they're tracking the old Burma supply trail marker." He was right. I recognized the terrain now. We had drifted onto a faint ridgeline path that old maps label as a 1944 logistics route. A weathered stone marker stood somewhere ahead, half buried in moss. The column kept moving without pause. We rose silently and followed at a distance, curiosity overriding protocol. The evaluators could wait. They halted in a small natural clearing where the trail widened. Without any visible command, the ranks dressed right, closed intervals, came to attention. Then, one by one, they simply collapsed. Not dramatically, more like men reaching the absolute end of endurance. Knees buckled, rifles dropped, bodies folded to the ground. Faces pressed into leaf mold, as if finally surrendering to sleep. The entire formation dissolved into the earth, fading from NVG view like mist burning off at dawn. We reached the clearing minutes later. Nothing remained. No impressions in the soft ground. No discarded gear. No heat residue. Just undisturbed forest floor and the faint smell of wet soil. I called a security halt, and we sat there until first light, rifles outward, saying nothing. When the evaluators finally located us at the rally point, they chewed us out for the delay, but logged the lane as complete. We never filed an official report. Ikeda put in his separation papers 3 months later. The rest of us just carried on. Sometimes, on later exercises in that same grid square, you catch it again, faint, marching on the flank, always moving deeper into the hills, always the same direction, as if they're still trying to reach a front line that no longer exists. Chapter 5. The Barracks Room Visitor. I was a newly promoted lieutenant in 2020, assigned as platoon leader for a rifle company during a month-long training rotation at the mountain base. Officers' quarters were in Block D, a narrower two-story structure set apart from the enlisted barracks. My room was on the second floor, corner position, single occupancy, small desk, wall locker, standard metal rack with a thin mattress that never quite felt long enough. The building had been refitted with modern wiring and heaters, but the windows were still the original narrow slits, and the concrete walls held the cold no matter how high you cranked the thermostat. One night in late autumn, a powerful storm front moved through the mountains. Wind howled around the eaves, rain lashed the windows and sheets, and thunder rolled down the valleys like distant artillery. Power flickered twice around midnight before cutting out completely. Emergency lights kicked in along the corridor, bathing everything in dim red. I lay awake, listening to the storm, too wired from the day's after-action reviews to sleep. At some point, I couldn't say exactly when, I became aware I was no longer alone in the room. Someone stood at the foot of my bunk, upright, motionless, hands clasped behind the back in parade rest posture. The red emergency light from the half-open door outlined the figure clearly enough to make out details. He wore the old service dress of a field-grade officer. Type 98 tunic with stand and fall collar, breeches tucked into polished boots, a narrow sword belt with the katana still sheathed at his left hip. Insignia glinted faintly, major's stars on the shoulder boards, branch color dark. The uniform was immaculate, as if freshly issued, yet the cloth looked heavy with damp and age. His cap sat square on his head, brim pulled low. The face was what rooted me to the mattress. Gaunt, yes, like all the others, but with a lingering authority in the set of the jaw. Cheeks hollow, eyes deep-set but sharp, fixed directly on me. Skin pale, almost luminous in the red light. I sat up slowly, reaching for the flashlight on my side table. "Who's there? Identify yourself." No answer at first. Then he spoke, voice low, precise, carrying easily over the storm outside. "Hokoku Seo." Report. The words were formal Imperial-era Japanese, the kind you only encounter in old staff college texts. I understood them clearly enough. An order to deliver a situation report. I swung my legs off the bunk, feet touching cold concrete. "This is a restricted area. State your name and unit." He unclasped his hands and raised the right arm slowly, pointing past me toward the window. Rain streaked the glass. Beyond it, only blackness and the occasional flash of lightning over the tree line. "Zenin, Shinu, all, die." The statement was delivered without inflection, as if reading from a final dispatch. Then he brought his heels together, bowed deeply from the waist, precise 45 degrees, palms flat along the seams of his trousers, and straightened. Flicked on the flashlight. The beam passed straight through him, illuminating the far wall and the JSDF flag folded on my desk. Empty space where he had stood. No reflection in the window, no shadow on the floor, only the faint scent of wet earth and something metallic lingering in the air. Power restored a minute later. Fluorescence buzzed back to life. Heater fan whirred. I searched the room, the corridor, even went downstairs to check the duty log. Nothing. Doors locked, windows secure, no sign of entry. The next morning, I visited the base historical archive, a small locked room in the old headquarters nobody uses much anymore. An elderly civilian clerk let me in without questions. Officers get leeway. I pulled the 1944 deployment albums, faded black and white photographs of units staging here before embarkation to Burma. I found him on the third page. I turned. Group portrait of the regimental staff, 3rd Division. The major stood front row center, sword drawn for the photo, face stern but healthy. Nothing like the wasted figure from my room. Caption listed his name and confirmed KIA, Burma Front, June 1944. He had come back to the place his regiment last assembled as a complete unit. Stood in a modern officer's room and demanded the report he never got to send. I requested transfer off the base 2 weeks later. Approved without comment. Some orders, it seems, remain outstanding long after the war is over, and some officers never stop waiting for the final accounting of the men placed under their command. Chapter 6. Shadows in the Mess Hall. I served as a mess specialist from 2014 to 2018. assigned to the consolidated dining facility that feeds the entire training base. The building itself is one of the oldest still in daily use. A long, high-ceilinged hall constructed in 1937, originally meant to seat an entire regiment at tables. The interior is classic Imperial design. Heavy timber beams overhead, tall, narrow windows along both walls, a raised serving counter at one end, and a kitchen complex at the other. Post-war renovations added stainless steel serving lines, industrial exhaust hoods, and tile flooring. But the bones remain. The acoustics are strange. Sounds either die quickly or echo forever, depending on how full the hall is. Cooks and bakers work the early shift, starting around 400 to have breakfast ready for first formation. Most days there are 3 or 4 of us on prep, moving between the walk-in coolers, the prep tables, and the massive rice cookers. On this particular morning in midsummer 2016, I drew the solo shift because the rest of the team was down with food poisoning from a bad batch of seafood the day before. I didn't mind. I liked the quiet. The hall was dark when I arrived, only the emergency exit signs glowing red. I flipped on the kitchen banks first, then walked the length of the dining area to raise the security shutters and let in the pre-dawn gray. The long tables were already set from the night. Crew, trays aligned, chopsticks and spoons in racks, miso bowls stacked, everything regulation neat. I returned to the kitchen and started the rice steamers. The hum filled the space, steady and familiar. While the water heated, I stepped back into the hall to check the beverage urns. That's when I heard the chairs. A slow, deliberate scraping, dozens of them all at once, like an entire company pulling seats away from tables in unison. I froze in the doorway. The hall was no longer empty. Shadows filled every bench. Hundreds of figures seated in perfect rows, backs straight, hands resting on the tables in front of them. They wore the faded remnants of field uniforms, tunics unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled, some with rags tied around their heads against the heat. Heads were bowed slightly, as if waiting for the serving line to open. No faces visible, just darkness under helmet brims or bare skulls. Empty trays sat before each one. No food, no steam, no smell of rice or miso. Just the silent posture of men accustomed to long waits for meager rations. I stood there, heart hammering against my ribs, unable to move. The rice steamer clicked over to warm mode behind me, but the sound felt distant, muffled. The shadows began to move, not standing, just leaning forward slightly, elbows on tables, hands reaching for invisible spoons. The faint scrape of ceramic on ceramic echoed through the hall, hundreds of bowls being lifted, sipped, set down again. Empty air, empty motions. Then one figure near the center aisle rose slowly to his feet. Tall, thin uniform hanging loose on a frame that had once been broader. He raised a metal cup with both hands, steady despite the obvious weakness, and turned to face the seated ranks. The voice that came was faint, dry, carried on air that suddenly smelled of rain-soaked earth and unwashed bodies. "Tenoheka! Banzai!" The response rose from every shadow throat, a low rustle like wind through dead leaves. "Banzai! Banzai! Banzai!" 3 times, ritual perfect, the final cheer for Emperor and Empire that every soldier of that era knew by heart. The cup lowered, the standing figure sat again. The motions continued, eating what wasn't there, drinking from cups that held nothing. I don't know how long I watched. Minutes, maybe. Then a pot timer went off in the kitchen, shrill, insistent. I jerked, stumbled backward, and the noise shattered everything. When I looked again, the hall was empty. Chairs perfectly aligned, trays untouched, morning light beginning to filter through the high windows. Only a single metal cup lay on its side near the center table, something that hadn't been there when I checked the night before. I righted it with shaking hands and finished the shift alone. Breakfast went out on time. No one noticed anything wrong. Later, reading unit histories during downtime, I learned that regimental mess halls in the Burma retreat became the last gathering points. Men too weak to march would crawl to whatever shade offered a shared kitchen, pooling the final handfuls of rice or moldy biscuits. They ate in silence, saving strength, often raising a last toast with whatever water remained. Some habits, it seems, carry beyond the grave. To this day, early shift cooks set an extra tray at the end of the serving line, just in case. No one admits why, but the tray is always empty when we close up. Chapter 7. The final roll call. I am a Sergeant First Class posted to the base in 2024 as Company Operations NCO for a training cycle that ran through the autumn. By then, I had 15 years in the JGSDF and thought I had seen every quirk a remote installation could throw at you. The mountain base still surprised me. Dawn formations are standard. 0500 Reveille, 0530 First Call, 0600 Assembly on the main parade ground for PT, and the daily roll call. The ground itself is old concrete, poured in the late 1930s, ringed by the original barracks blocks and the headquarters flagpole. A low stone wall separates the square from the tree line on the eastern side, where the forest drops away into the valleys. The air at that hour is always cold and still, mist clinging to the ground until the sun clears the ridges. On a clear morning in early November, the company formed up in perfect ranks, 3 platoons, full strength, rifles at order arms. The company commander stood front and center, first sergeant to his right, with the roster clipboard. I was positioned at the rear, monitoring interval and alignment. The first sergeant began the roll call exactly on time. Names rang out in steady cadence, responses snapping back sharp and clear. Abe, hi. Fujita, hi. Hayashi, hi. Standard. Textbook, every man present and accounted for. Then between 2 names, after Matsumoto and before Nakajima, something else answered. A second voice, faint but unmistakable, carried from the tree line, dry, exhausted, yet drilled to precision. Hi. The first sergeant paused for half a beat, eyes flicking toward the forest, then continued without comment. Nakajima, hi, from our ranks, and again from the shadows under the trees. Hi. It continued like that. Every name called from the modern roster drew the expected response from the formation, and a second delayed echo from the tree line. The voices were many, overlapping slightly, as if an entire second company stood at invisible attention just beyond the wall. No one broke ranks. No one turned around. We are trained to hold position and discipline held. But I saw necks stiffen, shoulders square a fraction tighter, breath clouds rose faster in the cold. The first sergeant's voice remained steady, professional, as he worked down the list. When he reached the final name on our company roll, Yamamoto, our private answered crisply, then silence. For a long moment, the parade ground was perfectly still. Only the flag, snapping faintly overhead, and the distant call of a morning crow. The first sergeant closed the clipboard, prepared to give the command for right face and morning PT. Before he could speak, a single voice rose from the tree line, stronger now, formal, carrying the weight of command. Zenin, Sunshitsu, all lost. It was not shouted. It did not need to be. Every man on the square heard it clearly. The company commander let the silence stretch for 3 full seconds. Then, quietly, company dismissed. We broke ranks and filed toward the mess hall without a word. PT was canceled that morning. The official log cited inclement weather, though the sky was clear. Later in the operations office, the commander told me privately that the same thing had happened twice before in his career. Always at that base, always during autumn cycles. The names that answered from the trees were never on our rosters. Cross-checking old records showed many of them belonged to soldiers of the regiment that formed up on the exact same square in 1944 before marching out to their transports. They were answering a roll call that began 80 years ago.